Good afternoon. I almost said morning. It's not morning for me, it's afternoon, just afternoon, 1 p.m. Welcome to a weird Wednesday live stream LinkedIn. See, now I'm really thrown off. It's all messed up. I should just restart the whole thing. Welcome to a LinkedIn lunch live stream. LinkedIn lunch live stream. Usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but today on Wednesday, not tomorrow because it's Thanksgiving here, national holiday in the United States. And then yesterday had some changes in my schedule yesterday. I had to go in the office, so I couldn't do the live stream yesterday. So we moved it to today. We'll see if anybody shows up. Looks like we've got somebody in here. Welcome. I want to say Sai. Let me know if that's the right pronunciation there. From Virginia. Awesome. Looks like you're probably new because I don't recognize you. So welcome to the LinkedIn Lunch live stream. See, I knew I'd get it back. LinkedIn Lunch live stream on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Welcome, Kelly. Good to see you. I'm gonna grab some water. I made the mistake of eating a cookie right before I came on, so now not only is my voice hoarse from talking in client meetings today, but it's a little dusty now because of the cookies. So we'll deal with that as we go. So good to have you all on here. Sai, welcome. If you're wondering, yeah, things get a little weird at the beginning usually on these live streams. Just trying to keep it real, just trying to be me no matter what. But welcome. If you are watching live, definitely jump into the chat, say hello. As a reminder, what we're typically doing here on these LinkedIn lunch live streams is we're looking at different posts from LinkedIn that I think are helpful or valuable, either from an agreement standpoint or from a disagreement standpoint. Just something that I think is good to talk about. And so we've got various different topics here today. I've been working on trying to get this LinkedIn profile connected to more various types of content, that I think will be helpful for specifically junior developers, but really I think for most developers, most of the content that we have here is helpful. But that is the goal at the end of the day, is to be helpful for you. It's not just to build up a massive YouTube empire. As you can tell, I'm working really hard at that by all the canceled live streams. But if you find this helpful, I do appreciate it. If you would, more than anything, tell other people about it. But also feel free to like the live streams and the videos, and subscribe if you're not subscribed. It is interesting. I haven't been doing what I've been wanting to do as far as getting some videos out based off the live streams lately, and yet we've been starting to pick up a few more subscribers here and there. So that's cool. But anyway, this is really about you guys and for you guys. My goal is to try to be as helpful as I can, and that means answering your questions. That means talking about topics that you want me to talk about. Again, always remember, the information that I give you is based off of my experience. That doesn't mean that I have all the answers, and it doesn't mean that I have the right answers necessarily for you, but I'm going to tell you the truth based on my experience and based on what I know. And if I have other places to point you, I'll point you there as well. So, and again, that's another reason for doing this LinkedIn lunch live stream, is it gets some other voices out there, even on the channel, and gives us some opportunity to interact with some content that's outside of just me talking forever, or just answering a bunch of questions. So, but if you do have a question, or if you have a comment, or you have an opinion about anything that we're discussing here on the LinkedIn lunch live stream, definitely throw it into the chat. If you have something that you want me to respond to, type @DevMentorDave at the beginning. It just gives like a little red box around my name, which catches my attention a little bit more easily, especially when I get into one of my longer monologues or soapboxes. So definitely feel free to interact on the chat, and because that's really what I'm here for. That's why I do mostly live streams now, any videos I'm going to put up are going to be rare standalone videos, or they're going to be coming from the live streams, because um, I my goal is not necessarily to just make a bunch of videos. My goal is to interact with people. So definitely take advantage of the interactions here. Uh, I'll say it again there for you, Saya. Sorry you got dropped off. So basically, what we do here is we take a look at some LinkedIn posts that I found this morning. They may not be from this morning, but they're ones that I saw this morning, and we just interact with them, talk about whether I agree with them, whether I disagree with them. Hopefully, they're helping us give you some good, helpful advice and ideas in your development journey, whether you're a junior developer, mid, senior, lead, higher than me, whatever. But hopefully they're at least helpful as we go through these. So definitely feel free to share your opinions and your feedback on the things that we talk about during this session. Typically, this is a 1 hour session. And we go from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, most of the time, and then Wednesdays when we get knocked off our schedule. So so we're here for Wednesday this week. So let's go ahead and dive into, if I can find the right thing here, dive into our first LinkedIn post. All right, let's take a look at this. This is from Akshay. Says this: many developers think debugging is about adding more console.logs everywhere, blaming the compiler or framework, restarting the system and hoping for magic. That's a pretty good start. I've been guilty as charged on most of those things, right? So when you've been doing this for a long time, you definitely can fall into some bad habits and some bad patterns for sure. Okay, awesome. So you're familiar with Akshay. That's cool. So you can definitely fall into some of these bad patterns of just throwing console logs everywhere and not really knowing how to, or digging into the actual root of the problem, right? Or you just kind of get mad at the compiler because you didn't write very good code, and so now it's complaining. Or restarting, that whole statement, restarting the system and hoping for magic. The hard thing is, though, so often you do restart it and it works. That's the problem. Maybe that's just laziness. I don't know, but that really, to his point, that really is not debugging, right? That's definitely not in its true sense debugging. It's more kicking the can down the road and hoping that nobody notices, or it doesn't pop back up again, whatever the issue was. So I definitely agree with him. That's not really debugging. That's just hoping the issue goes away and you don't have to deal with it anymore. So, but let's be real. That is something that actually happens, right? We actually do that as developers. And it's not just because we're lazy. It's because a lot of times there's a lot of pressure on us to get things done and pushed out the door. And if we run into a bug or something that we can't reproduce, or we restart the system like he said, and the bug seems to go away, oftentimes we don't have the time to dig into it much deeper than that. So I do want to give that caveat that there is a reality of our jobs and how we interact with the systems and with code that oftentimes doesn't give us the opportunity to really dig deeper. And these other options that he's talking about, the console logs and restarting and things like that, they're quick fixes, they're quick tests to see if we can at least keep moving forward. But I do agree completely that that's not really debugging at the end of the day. So true debugging is about understanding the root cause, not just the systems or the symptoms. And I think that's really the key to all of this, right? Do you know your code base well enough to know where the probable gotchas are when you get an error in your console? And now a lot of times they're going to give you line numbers or things like that in the error stack, but sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not. And I think that's something that we just have to come to grips with and realize we need to understand the code base. We need to understand how the application is working well enough to be able to debug where the issues are. I was actually just dealing with this recently in one of the projects that I'm overseeing here at work, and we had an error pop up, and the error message was completely useless. There was no way of knowing from the error message what the problem was. We had to dig deeper and kind of go through and figure out, okay, what is it that this code base is actually doing? What is the user trying to do? They're trying to access this part of the application. Okay, if they're trying to access this part of the application, what pieces of the application are being loaded at this time? Where are the possible things that could be breaking? And we were able to track that down. But the only way we were able to track that down is because we understood the code base. We understood what the root causes could possibly be because of how the application had been written, what the user was trying to do. Just leaning on error messages is not going to help you with a lot of bugs. In fact, I would say probably half the bugs that I've dealt with recently, the error messages really were mostly useless. It was all about what the user was trying to do and what I know the application is doing at that point. So when you're developing an application, you want to make sure that you are paying attention and knowing, especially in a team environment, what else is going on in that application code. Especially if you're working on a big project, that's going to be really tough to do. You'll probably have to debug things with more than one person at times because not everybody knows every aspect of the application. A lot of the applications that we build at my company are developed by one dev, maybe two devs, so we don't have that problem as much, but it is still a problem. You need to make sure that you understand how the code base is working. This is another reason why, especially for junior developers, I don't recommend you use a lot of AI generated code. And again, I'm not against AI generated code. I'm actually beginning to use AI generated code and AI opportunities, we'll put it that way, more and more in the projects that I'm working on in my own daily life. So I'm not rejecting AI. I'm just saying when you use AI a lot, especially as a junior developer, and you lean heavily on that for building code, you don't know the code base as well as you think you do. And you may not be able then to actually understand the root cause, which is what he's saying here. You're not gonna be able to understand what the symptoms are, what the root cause could be, because you don't really know the code base that well. So that's why I think, especially for a junior developer, the more you can write the code yourself, the better off you are from a debugging standpoint, because you're more likely to figure out where the problems are coming in. All right, but it's not just understanding the root cause. It's about being able to break down the problem logically. Again, thinking through that process, right? That was the process that we were dealing with this bug that I was talking about. Knowing what is the user doing that's causing the issue. What's actually happening at that time programmatically in the application. Being able to break that down logically and kind of backflow step by step, even without a good stack trace, is something that you need to be able to do. That's real debugging in the real world in real time. So I absolutely agree. You need to be able to break down the problem logically. And then using the right tools like debuggers and logs effectively. Yeah, instead of just throwing console logs out everywhere, you want to be able to use the right tools that are going to help you get to the right solution as quickly as possible. They're going to point you in the right direction as quickly as possible. And then I think this last one to me is the biggest one. Learning from every bug to avoid it the next time. This for me is like the key, the holy grail of why I think junior devs need to be building real projects, not just doing tutorials. You can do tutorials. I'm not saying don't do tutorials. But when you do tutorials, everything's planned out for you. When you build your own project, you have to deal with the bugs yourself. You have to deal with the problems yourself, the logic issues yourself. And every time you run into one of those things, it's a learning opportunity. And hopefully you remember that learning opportunity years down the line, and it helps you write code better the first time, so that you don't have as many bugs. If you've been watching live on some of the other things that we've done, especially Saturdays when we do our Saturday live stream, you'll probably have seen me writing code and running into issues that I didn't write very good code, and at the end, most of the time when I'm doing that, usually I have a very quick idea as to what the issue is, and the reason for that is not because I'm a genius, because I'm not. The reason for that is because I've seen that bug before. I've made that same error before. So even if you don't become a perfect developer, you still will recognize the bugs faster if it's something that you've dealt with in the past. So I'm able to debug things in Laravel a lot faster than I used to, because I've dealt with, forgetting certain things over and over again. And so now I remember them sometimes, and when I forget them, I remember them faster, which helps me debug faster because I've learned from the mistakes that I've had in the past. So that is really key when it comes to debugging. It's not just about the tools. It's not just about the framework. It's not just about restarting it. I absolutely agree. It really is about, in my opinion, knowing the code base, taking in everything that you have about the issue, starting with what the user's doing, or what the request is, if it's some third-party interaction or something like that, and understanding your code base well enough to do that breakdown, that logical walk back in the process to figure out what is most likely causing the error that you're running into. So I definitely agree with Akshay on this one, and he's got 1.5 million viewers on YouTube, so probably a good stance to probably agree with him. I don't know. All right, let's take a look at another one here. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So this is from someone I actually just saw come up today. I don't know anything about Mariah. I assume that's the right pronunciation, Mariah Tech. She's a design engineer. So here's what she says: why I fell in love with Tailwind CSS. Real talk. I used to think this is just inline styles with extra steps. Well, I was wrong. I wouldn't say that she was wrong with her first assumption. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I am not a huge fan of Tailwind CSS. The idea, I feel like, is better than the execution, because it really is basically just adding styles differently at the end of the day. I know that sounds unfair, and I know a lot of people love Tailwind CSS, and it's made a lot of people's jobs a lot easier. But we were actually just having this discussion at work the other day, and it really is. You can't get around the fact that you're still adding tons of descriptors to your elements in HTML when you're using something like Tailwind CSS. Yes, it is. It is somewhat easier to read what you're doing, although I would say that if you know CSS and you're reading styles, inline styles, you're able to see pretty much the same thing. Just because you're writing nomenclature that tells you what it's doing, like text white or text black or primary, whatever, right? Just because you're using words to describe something that you would otherwise do with settings, right? So like border left, right? So instead of just border and then your values, if you're used to writing CSS, if you've been doing it for a long time like me, I can read the CSS style faster than I can read Tailwind CSS. Now, that's not to say that Tailwind CSS is bad. It's just different, and I think that we need to be honest about that. It really is inline styles with different words. and with extra steps, Now, the difference is time and exposure and experience. So again, like I said, I can read CSS much faster or styles much faster and better than I read Tailwind CSS. There's a reason for that. And that reason is that I've not used Tailwind CSS very much. I have used regular CSS, regular styles for 20 plus years. So if I'm used to reading this, I'm going to be able to do that much faster than I can something new like Tailwind CSS. And I know technically it's not really new, but it's new to me because I've not used it a whole lot in many things. In fact, I bought the Tailwind CSS UI component library to use it, and in my opinion, it's not really a component library. It's just more of a bunch of examples of how to use Tailwind CSS. So right there, I ended up getting my money back because I'm like, this is useless to me. I was hoping it would make Tailwind much easier, and in reality, it didn't. It just gave you a bunch of examples of how to use Tailwind CSS. But here's the main point. The reason why she changed her position from it's just inline styles to it's more than that is not because Tailwind got better. It's not because Tailwind is better. It's because she got used to using it, and she used it a lot. And because she used it a lot, she got faster at using it. And I think that's something that's really important for us when we think about any tool set that we use, whether it's a framework for CSS or for some other language, whether it's a specific IDE or something like that. You've got to understand that everything that's new comes with a learning curve. All right, so just because everybody loves it doesn't mean it's going to be the best thing for you. Just because a lot of people think it's faster doesn't mean it's going to be faster for you. So it's really important that we understand that anything new like this is going to take time to learn. And it's only going to become faster and better for you the more you learn how to use that tool. Like I said, I feel like most of the time I can use basic styles just as fast as I could use Tailwind because I don't know Tailwind very well. And the documentation's fine and helpful, but I'm just not fast at it. I could use Bootstrap CSS library much faster than I could Tailwind CSS, and that's not because Bootstrap's better or Tailwind is worse. It's just because that's what I got used to. So again, we look at this statement. She's like, "What clicked? Ship faster, brain stays in flow." Right? Okay, that very first item right there, brain stays in flow. It's because you've trained your brain to think in terms of Tailwind CSS. And we've got to understand that with anything that we use, it's going to be a training. It's not necessarily a matter of a better tool. It's more of a matter of being used to using it, right? So if you're going from writing styles or creating your own CSS style sheets or, something like that feels more manual, to then being able to just type in a bunch of classes to get the design that you want, of course, that's going to get better and faster because you're going to use it more. So Tailwind is only better once you put in the effort and learn it. It doesn't mean that it's inherently better, right? Again, I think I could still probably whip out a lot more stuff faster without Tailwind than with it. But that's based on my experience. That's based on my lack of use of that specific product. I can build an application a whole lot faster in Laravel now than I would have before with any other framework because I've been using it more and using it more frequently. My brain, like she says, brain stays in flow. My brain stays in the flow of the application process of Laravel. So it's less about the application. It's less about the product and more about you using it consistently and learning the ins and outs of it. For example, you might have a specific IDE that isn't the most popular one, which is Studio. What is it? Microsoft's I can't think of it. Let's say you like something else like Sublime Text, right? So there's lots of devs still using Sublime Text, but they can use it faster than other people than if they were using something else because they know it. So it's more about time and experience and exposure to what you're using than anything. So these things that she's bringing up, shipping faster, brain stays in flow, zero context switching between files. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know where that necessarily comes in. Read code once, understand the design. Again, I can understand the design just looking at styles most of the time because that's what I've been doing for 20 years, right? No more wrapper container entering. So these things, again, when she says what clicked, it's her experience changing, right? It's not necessarily this being superior. It's that she has been using it enough that her experience and her exposure to this has caused her to change her view of Tailwind CSS. And I think more than likely, if I were using Tailwind CSS every day, if I were forced to do that at my job, which very well someday I may, I would probably end up feeling the same way. It's kind of like React. Not a big fan of React, but I've used React enough that I feel comfortable with it and I can move effectively with React. So it's a fine language. Is it my favorite? No. I mean, it's a fine framework. Is it my favorite? No, it's not my favorite framework, but I can move quickly because I've had to spend the time doing it. Does that make it superior? No. Does that mean everybody who loves it is smart? No. Not in my opinion. But I can at least use it, and I use it better in it, and I can get into the flow. All these things that she's saying about Tailwind is the same for me with React, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a superior product. So that's where I would differ with this specific thing. Building layouts feels like Legos. Yeah, I mean, it feels that way with almost any framework that you use because that's kind of the idea. The idea is to give you building blocks to be able to build something. Your code actually tells you what it looks like. Again, yeah, any of it should if you're writing it correctly. The best part, coming back months later, not hating your own code. I will say, if you don't come back hating your own code, you might not have grown a whole lot in your development. But I get what she's saying, absolutely. So that's just another one that maybe I get what she's saying. I don't necessarily agree with completely. I think it's less about the product and more about the exposure that you have in the product and the time that you have dedicated to learning that product. Any tool will be a helpful tool if you spend the time learning how to use it. If I give you a hammer and I don't show you how to use the hammer, that tool is not very useful. But if you are told how to use the hammer, if you spend time practicing using the hammer, if you learn all the different aspects of that hammer and how professionals use that hammer, and you practice doing it, you're going to get proficient at that hammer, and that hammer is going to be helpful to you in construction jobs down the road. So it's less about the tool itself and more about your dedication to learning new things and giving new things a chance and time so that you can learn them well in the future. So all right. I definitely think Wednesdays are not the days for live streams. I think everybody's fallen off at this point. Maybe they just don't like my take. There's that. Feel free to disagree with me in the comment section. All right, let's take a look here. This one I haven't actually even read through yet, so let's read through it together here. Okay. Harley Ferguson says, give me 2 minutes and I'll teach you 6 rules for becoming a better developer. And again, I think this is probably helpful for devs at any level, not just junior devs, but especially for junior devs. what's going to make you a better developer here? So, number one, prioritize readability. Write code that is easy to understand. Complex code is not smart. Simple code is smart. I definitely want to echo that. So, generally speaking, and again, this is generalities, right? So, generally speaking, less code is more thoughtful code. A lot of times, if you're writing a lot of code, you're probably thinking through the problem while you're writing the code. Generally, it's better to think through the problem before you write the code, and so you know what you need to do, and then you just knock out the code, right? You get it done. Typically, it's smaller. Most long functions need to be refactored. Now, are there times where it's just multiple steps in a function that need things that need to happen? Sure, absolutely. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I would definitely prioritize short code, and I would definitely prioritize writing code that is readable in the sense of when you write it, you understand what it's doing. So name your function something that makes sense, right? Like add user. All right, just for lack of a better thing, right? Add user. Um, Write the actual words out. Add user. So that we know what that function does. Obviously, when code gets minified and things like that, especially like JavaScript code, it obfuscates some of that stuff. And I get that. That's fine. But when you're in the editor, when you're working on code, write variables that describe what the variable actually is, right? Don't just be like, var a equals, write a variable that makes sense. So when someone's reading your code or when you're reading your code later on, you can see what you were thinking when you wrote the code. So prioritize writing code that is readable. Prioritize making code that when you read it, you just know what it does. Then you don't need to write a bunch of comments too. You don't have to clutter your code base with comments if you write code that's readable. If you write code that makes sense as you're reading it, you can tell exactly what it's doing because you're using variable names, you're using method names to actually write the code in such a way that you can understand it. It's like reading an instruction manual, so to speak. Because really, that's what you're doing. You're writing an instruction manual for a computer. So if you're writing an instruction manual that's readable for a human, then you're helping both the computer and the human actually write the code or run the program that you're trying to write. So I would definitely agree, prioritize readability in your code. Number two, master your tools. Invest time in learning your IDE, Git, and debugger tools. You'll save hours. Again, I highly agree with this one too. We just got done talking about this a few minutes ago when it comes to like the Tailwind and other frameworks and things like that. You are only going to be faster the better you know your tools. The more time and exposure you've given to them, the better developer you are going to be. So whether that's your IDE, whether that's Git, whether that's any sort of like composer, or I don't remember what else is out there right there, but in any of these tools that you use, you want to make sure that you know them as well as you can. Now, sometimes when you're in the real world working, say that 3 times fast. Sometimes when you're in the real world working, you don't always have the time to dig into every detail of a tool, and that's fine. But as much as you can, learn what you can about that tool, because a lot of times I've used tools and frameworks for years and not known certain aspects that completely saved me time later on. So if you can, spend the time to get to know those things better so that you know how to use them in a way that's going to make you more productive long term. All right, number 3, embrace testing. Write tests early and often. You'll catch bugs sooner, reduce risk, and create more resilient code. Now this one's a hard one because philosophically I absolutely agree. The hard thing is you don't always get that opportunity. There have been very few jobs that I have held in my career where testing was a priority. And very few more than that where testing was allowed or accepted. The reality is, especially if you're working in an environment where you're dealing with outside clients who are paying weekly or hourly bills, basically you're going to run into this situation where trying to explain spending time writing tests, writing automated tests, unit tests, clients don't understand the value of that. They don't see the value of that because that's not helping them in their mind. That's not helping them actually get the product on the shelves or get the product in front of their users. It's just in their mind, it's wasted money to let you spend, half as much time adding tests to the application. They don't see the benefit of it because they are not the ones that have to deal with the bugs that happen later on. They'll have to pay for them, but they don't have to deal with figuring out why things happened. So philosophically, I completely agree. Testing is awesome. It's very helpful, and you should absolutely learn how to do it. Any language, any framework that you're working with, look at the testing opportunities that are there. Be familiar with writing tests and pursue adding tests to some of your applications. There's been times where I've added tests simply for my own benefit, and I just haven't charged the client for it, because they are very beneficial for you. They're going to help you, as he says, they're going to help you catch bugs sooner. They're going to help you catch bugs when you write code in other places in the code base. When you run that test suite and some other code breaks that you completely forgot was dependent on the things that you were changing, well, now you've got something to catch that rather than the users catching it, since you obviously didn't catch it yourself. And so I think it's important to, as much as possible, pursue that. Now, again, in my experience and in a lot of the jobs that I've had, testing was not a priority, and it was not typically encouraged from an automated or unit test standpoint. We always had some sort of QA or something like that, or user testing or things like that. So it's not like testing was completely gone. But this idea of unit testing or automated testing, which is what he's talking about, that really is, it's extremely helpful more for the development process than it is for the end client or the end user. And so that's why it's very difficult at times to be able to get permission to even add tests from a client, because they don't see the value, and they don't like paying for things that they don't see an immediate value in. If you can convince them to do it, you'll be the better for it, and they'll be the better for it in the long term. But definitely get used to the different types of testing suites that are out there, especially for the languages that you're working in, frameworks that you're working in. See what's out there, get used to using them, and try to implement them as much as you can. Unfortunately, a lot of times it comes down to your company and your clients, though, when it comes to testing. Okay, number 4, learn to estimate. Break tasks down into smaller items of work so you can estimate time. It's a skill, but it will help you manage expectations and not overcommit. Again, this is really, really important. I highly agree with this. A couple of caveats. One is this has to happen over time, and it's going to change over time. So that's something you need to be careful of when you're looking at your estimates. Your estimates are going to get better over time, but they're also going to change over time because you're going to get better at development over time. So you need to understand how long it takes you to do X type of work, but that time frame is going to shrink over time. But it's also going to change depending on the tools that you're using. Again, how familiar you are with those tools. If you're using a brand new framework on this project, your estimations are going to be bigger, or should be bigger, because you don't know what all it's going to take necessarily to do the same thing that you've done in another framework or in another language, because it's something that's new. So learning to estimate, there are some key aspects of it, but it's always going to be subjective. And I think you need to understand that. throughout your career, your estimates are still going to be somewhat fluid. You can get better at them. It is a skill, but it's a skill that is a variable skill, and you have to be able to to do what he's talking about, break down a problem, right? So break down to small tasks, but you are more likely to know the amount of time it's going to take, and then build those up and come to your estimates. That is a process. It takes time. It takes effort. You can't just sit there and be like, it's going to be, X number of hours or X number of points or X t-shirt size or whatever stupid thing we're using now to determine how long something's going to take. It annoys me. Companies really want to be able to track that stuff, and the reality is software really doesn't. Can it come into averages? Yes, it can come into averages over time, but you're never going to get it exact. So there's that. But remember, learning to estimate is it is a skill, but it's always going to be variable based on the different things that are involved and your knowledge and experience in those things. But I do agree it's something that we should seek to try to grow and get better at. Number 5, take breaks. Step away from the keyboard, clear your mind. It's amazing how often you'll find the answer when you're not actively working on the problem. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone down for lunch or gone to bed and the answer or a new way of approaching something pops into my head. When we're not working on something consciously, oftentimes our brains are still working on that problem subconsciously, and it's an amazing reality of people in general, but also of developers specifically, that we do tend to keep gnawing on things that are frustrations, but that doesn't mean you have to do it voluntarily, right? You can sometimes take a break, and it is amazing how often you come to a better conclusion or a better understanding or a different approach when you've stepped away, when you've changed perspectives, when you've started thinking about something else. It's a health thing, being able to take a break and to pause. Some people get headaches the longer they think about something. There's lots of reasons why this is a good thing, but it will often yield results that you didn't think you could yield otherwise. So I definitely agree. Take breaks. Happy Thanksgiving, Dimitri. Good to see you. Thanks for hopping in here. Getting close to the end here. We'll see what else we've got in our LinkedIn pile. Okay, this was interesting. Caught my eye. I thought we would take a look at it. All right, so I built Cast Vote using React Native to vote with your fingerprint. That's cool. Just looking at the video here, looks like it did a good job. I mean, it looks nice. Decent application. I don't know. I'm gonna assume that this is probably a fairly simple application. I don't know how much of a backend there is involved in that. There's a lot of things, if this were a real application, that he would have to go through. So that's why, I think this is the thing that kind of caught my eye the most when I was looking at this. It says it took me 14 days to build. Yeah, that's great. But there's a reason why software that's used by millions of people take more than one developer, more than 14 days to build. There's probably many, many gaps in this that he doesn't know about yet. If it were to actually be a real product, I'm sure there's a lot of security loopholes, even with the fingerprint thing. So again, I'm definitely not putting this down. It looks really nice. It seems to do exactly what he's wanting to do with it, which is cool. He's like, here's the app's features: 1 vote per user, only fingerprint allowed to actually cast a vote. live stats. Voter's card is required to sign up. Works on iOS and Android. So there's definitely some good things built into this, and I don't want to take anything away from the progress that was made here. All right. So again, Victor, if you're watching, I don't know, doubt you would be, but I'm not saying that this is a bad app by any stretch of the imagination. What I do want to caution is any assumption that because you built something that you have reached any specific status as a developer. And I don't necessarily think that's what he's claiming here. This is just something that kind of popped into my head as I was reading this. And I think it's more because of that line that says, it took me 14 days to build. That kind of hit me a little differently. And I would just caution you, just because you can build something that seems to meet a need or a concern, doesn't mean that you've built even a good solution for it. Again, this is a fine looking app. I'm not saying the app is a bad app, but that doesn't mean it's really the right solution or even a good solution for the voting problem that he's probably trying to deal with. So I just want to caution you, when you're building some of these projects on your own, even if it's to help to help a specific thing or an issue, like voting and tracking voting, and making sure that people have the right to vote and only get one vote, all these things that his application is doing. There's a lot of things that you have to think about from a security, can it be easily hacked? What about your backend? Where's this information going? Who has access to that? There's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle here outside of just the fluidity of the application and usability of the application, and even the front end features of the application. It's been said by many people before me, but software development is never done. The moment you start a software development project, you have locked yourself in for a lifetime of updates. Because that's the other thing with something like this, is somebody's going to find a way around it, and so you're going to have to patch it at some point too. So just understand, when you're building a project, even when you're building a project for a client, that process really is not over. When you hand them the keys to their project, you're most likely going to be connected to that client for a very long term, because they're going to find bugs and they're going to blame you, first of all, and then they're going to expect you to do something about it. And that's where you want to make sure you have a good agreement as to what done looks like and how any bugs after that process works and things like that. So you want to understand that software is never really completely done. Even if you meet all the requirements that the client has laid out for you, the project itself is never really done. That specific scope of work might be closed, but that software needs to be constantly growing and changing. And hopefully you work with clients that understand that. But that's just a caution that I had as I saw this post. I was like, just because it took 14 days doesn't mean that you're a good developer. It doesn't mean that the application's a good application. And just because it does all the things that you want it to do the way that you're using it, I would highly advise that you hand that over to a QA person and have them test it out, because they're probably going to find a lot of things that don't work the way that you intended them to. And you'll find that 14 days increasing very quickly. So that's just a couple of cents, something that I saw on there. I want to just comment on very quickly. Let's see. There's one more here. If I can find it. Where did I put it? Okay, yeah, we'll go with this one. So this is another Mariah Tech one. Let me get it up over here. Okay. So you learn more from messy projects than 50 perfect tutorials. And we've talked about this some in the past on different live streams. But it's always good, I think, to be reminded of this, and I think it's always good to hear from somebody else saying the same thing besides me. So you learn more from messy projects than 50 perfect tutorials. Real talk, that ugly to-do app I built taught me more about React than watching endless dev tutorials for a month. Struggling is greater than watching. Building is greater than following. So I would absolutely agree with this. Get your hands dirty. That's where the real learning happens. Sorry, just 1 second here. Um, sorry. Uh, yes. So, sorry about that. My wife was calling me. Um, absolutely agree with this, and I've said this many times in different ways, but tutorials are good. There's nothing wrong with tutorials. The problem with tutorials is how you use them as a junior developer, mid-level, senior level developer. You have to understand that tutorials are there to show you functionality of something, not to help you develop something. And you're going to learn more about actually using the software. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You've got to spend time in the framework, in the tool, whatever it is. You've got to spend time in that, working in that yourself, if you want to get better as a developer. And you will learn more in that process of struggling and searching for answers. This is one of the reasons why, again, I'm not against AI, but developers today are not going to be as good as the developers of the past, because they won't understand necessarily everything that they're writing. In the past, yeah, we did a lot of copy pasting from Stack Overflow, which doesn't mean that we understood what we were writing. But the reality is we understand more about what we write because we wrote it. Anything that you copy paste, anything that you have AI write, you're not going to understand as well, especially the earlier you are in your career. The more time you spend struggling and working through bugs and working through issues, even on a small application, without the help of just following a perfectly written out tutorial, the more you will understand how development works, how writing code works, how code works. You'll understand how the frameworks work. You'll remember those bugs better later on, like we talked about earlier. So the more you struggle as a developer, and this is really important, especially for junior developers right now who are struggling. I know a lot of junior developers feel like it shouldn't be this hard to become a developer. Here's the thing. It really should be this hard to become a developer. It should be a struggle. It should be difficult to become a developer, because if it's not, when you hit the real bugs and the real struggle, you're going to quit. You're going to realize that you didn't learn what you thought you'd learned, and you don't have the skill set to work through that. Now, some of you won't quit. You'll just learn it then. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who bought into this idea that coding is easy to learn. Anybody can do it. It just reminds me, my daughter just watched Ratatouille the other day. Jacques Cousteau is like, anybody can learn to cook, right? And that's the selling point of coding. We've been told anybody can learn to code, and that's true. Anybody can learn to write code, but that doesn't mean everybody's going to be a developer, and certainly not everybody's going to be a good developer. Good developers are made in the fire and the pain of struggle, and if you are struggling, you are making yourself a better developer than the person who's just doing a bunch of tutorials and following along and having perfect outcomes. Even following tutorials, doesn't always ensure a perfect outcome. But I totally agree with Mariah Tech here. It's definitely, you have to be building things and struggling in the building of those things in order to make yourself a better developer. And that will make you a better interviewer, because you'll be able to talk about real struggles and real successes in your journey. Whereas somebody who's just spent all their time learning in tutorials, they won't have that same experience. They won't have that same fallback to answer some of the questions that they're going to get in that interview process. So Absolutely agree on that. All right. I don't see any questions or anything here this afternoon, so I don't have time to jump into another post. So we're going to cut it off here just a couple minutes early. Thanks for jumping on, everybody who has been in here. Cy, Kelly, and Dimitri, good to see you all today. Happy Thanksgiving for those of you that might watch this later. And now you know where it was, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So thanks for joining me today. Look forward to seeing you all again on Saturday for our Saturday live stream, and then next week for our LinkedIn lunch live stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Saturday is at 10 a.m. Central United States time, 10 a.m. to noon. So I will see you all then. Thanks for joining with me, and thanks for listening to me rant and ramble about these LinkedIn posts. And we'll see you next time.